Confirming stream, 1 second. All right, welcome everyone to our hacker workshop. We have Kolten from Liquity with an intro to Liquity. You guys should feel free, if you're in the Zoom call, to enter your questions in the Zoom chat, and Kolten can read them as he goes along. And you're also, it's a workshop, so if you're really feeling it, you can turn on your audio and ask a question. Kolten's good to roll with that. So I'll let Kolten take it away. We have about 30 minutes.
Cool, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, as Andrew mentioned, I'm Kolten. I'm the head of growth at Liquity. Let me know if my screen isn't working. It should be working. But yeah, like you mentioned, feel free to interject at any time if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, or I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. If I miss it, just interrupt me and I'll stop and answer any questions. Before we get started though, I'll just knock out the important stuff right away in case you don't want to hear me ramble for the next 20 minutes. So our prizes for this event will be $2,500 for first place in LQTY tokens. Second, third place will be $1,500 in LQTY tokens. And then we'll be doing a pool of $1,500 in LQTY tokens, basically distributed across all ballot submissions under the sort of Liquity category. Some ideas that we're looking for. Again, I'm just getting this stuff out of the way, and then I'll actually cover what Liquity is in case you aren't familiar. Some ideas we're looking for are things like trove management tools, which are effectively position management tools, migration tools such as like Maker to Liquity tools or Aave to Liquity tools, sort of auto leveraging and deleveraging tools. So Liquity is a great protocol for using or getting leverage. So making that as easy as possible is always ideal. And then multitasking using things like Instadapp's DSA architecture or even just regular DS proxy architecture would be awesome. Things like the ability to claim LQTY rewards and then stake those rewards in one transaction. Instadapp also has prizes available for this event, so maybe there's some opportunity there to participate in both. And then any product that increases LUSD demand by utilizing Curve, Yearn, Pickle Finance, or sort of any other integration is fair game to us. And then resources are liquity.org and docs.liquity.org. All right, so now that the TLDR is out of the way, I'll actually kind of cover what Liquity is. So Liquity is a decentralized borrowing protocol that allows you to draw 0% interest loans against ETH as collateral. Those loans are paid out in LUSD, which is a USD peg stablecoin that's completely backed by ETH. It's not backed by any other forms of collateral. So our post-launch growth, my Zoom thing's in the way, I can't read this, there we go. So our post-launch growth has been pretty awesome. Right now there's around 970,000 ETH locked in the protocol. LUSD has a pretty big supply, around 780 million, which is, I think, a market cap a little over that of $780 million. There's around 840 troves open. I think, with the tools that are hopefully built throughout this event, we can get that well over 1,000. There's 1,000 stability providers in our stability pool, and Curve, our liquidity on Curve is around $240 million. So we launched around 2 months ago. So all of that is within about 2.5 months. So some unique features of Liquity that people are really resonating with are that it's capital efficient. We have a decentralized front-end model. There's 0% interest, as mentioned, and it's completely governance free. So there's no governance overhead in any way. So for the capital efficiency, Liquity allows for a minimum collateralization ratio as low as 110%, which is noticeably lower than other protocols that require 130, 150, or even as high as 750% collateralization ratios. And it gets away with this because it has a sort of efficient and instant liquidation mechanism. So other borrowing protocols require sort of collateral auctions or fixed price collateral sales whenever positions need to be liquidated. And these are sort of famously inefficient and slow. Back in, I think it was like Black Thursday a while back, like whenever we had issues across DeFi because of these mechanisms, Liquity, greatly improves upon those. So Liquity instead provides an instant liquidation mechanism that leverages existing stakeholders through what we call a stability pool. And it also uses a secondary redistribution mechanism in the event that that stability pool is empty. So the stability pool allows users to basically pre-commit LUSD to repay debt from liquidated troves in exchange for the surplus ETH collateral and additional LQTY rewards. This basically completely removes the need for auctions post liquidation. And I'll kind of go over how it works so we can kind of wrap our head around it. So you have the troves on the left and then the stability pool on the right. Users come along and they deposit LUSD up front, and they're basically saying, I'm willing to give up some of my LUSD exposure in the event that there's liquidations to buy that liquidated ETH collateral. And let's say a trove gets under collateralized, so it falls under the 110% collateral ratio. A liquidator comes along and says, okay, this position needs to be liquidated. It's under collateralized. That liquidator will receive 0.5% of the ETH in that trove, plus a 200 LUSD sort of flat fee. And then all of that trove's ETH will be distributed amongst the stability pool depositors. So now the liquidator's happy, they have their money, but and the ETH has been distributed to stability pool depositors. We still have this sort of leftover bad debt that we need to pay for. To do that, we just burn some LUSD proportionally across all stability pool depositors to pay off the debt. So the debt's made whole, everybody's happy. Stability pool depositors got to buy that liquidated collateral at a little bit of a discount, and we're all satisfied. And so the other bonus for participating in the stability pool is that you earn the sort of secondary token of liquidity called the LQTY token. And so these are rewarded proportionally to stability pool depositors as a function of time. So as long as you have an LUSD deposit in the stability pool, you're earning these rewards. And the sort of ETH rewards, if you want to call them that, are a lot more variable because it's hard to predict, when ETH is going to be volatile, when there's going to be liquidations, et cetera. If the stability pool is empty, the system falls back to a redistribution mechanism. And the way this works is relatively simple. So let's say we have a trove that needs to be liquidated, but there's nothing in the stability pool. That trove's collateral will be distributed proportionally amongst all of the other troves in the system according to the amount of collateral they have. So once the collateral is distributed proportionally, then the debt is distributed proportionally, and that trove is completely offset against all of the users in the system. So in the event that the stability pool is empty, then all of the risk kind of falls on the users of the protocol. And I mentioned LQTY. So again, LQTY is this sort of secondary token. It is a reward mechanism for stability providers and front-end operators, which I'll cover in a bit. LQTY can be staked in order to earn fees, which are generated from the protocol. Super simple. It's not a governance token. It doesn't give you any governance rights or anything like that. It's a really simple reward mechanism that can be staked, and then it can earn fees. So far, $12.5 million has been distributed to stakers since launch. So these rewards are paid out in LUSD, which is charged on loans whenever they're initiated, and then ETH whenever redemptions take place, which I'll cover later. And I guess I should add that LQTY staking is a relatively simple mechanism. It's not like Aave staking or some other protocol staking where LQTY holders take on some amount of risk for like backstopping the protocol or whatever. You simply earn the token and stake it, and there's no real like risk there as far as like you can't be slashed or anything. So I mentioned a second ago that front-end operators also receive LQTY rewards. And the reason for this is because Liquity AG, the company, or me or us that built the protocol, we do not actually run a front-end or UI for Liquity. So instead, we incentivize others in the ecosystem to do so via LQTY rewards. So basically, anybody can spin up a front end and have the opportunity to earn these additional rewards by generating turnover for the protocol. Just a little fun fact, the top 5 front ends have earned a combined 41,000, a little over 41,000 LQTY, which is around $370,000. And so that's not too bad for 2 months after launch. And the infrastructure looks a little bit like this. You have your typical back end, which is your smart contracts. Then you have your front end, and then users can access that protocol through whatever front end they choose. They don't just have to trust us to give them a good product. They can trust the ecosystem to give them a good product. And so the only way that front ends get paid is if people make stability pool deposits through the front end. So we covered the stability pool earlier. That is the one thing that front ends can earn rewards from. You don't earn rewards whenever people borrow from your protocol, but only when they deposit to the stability pool from your front end. So a stability deposit, when it's made through a front end, the front end tags it with its Ethereum address and what we call a kickback rate, which specifies how the LQTY rewards will be split between the front end and its users. So for example, a kickback rate of 80% means that the front end will receive 20% of its users' earned LQTY rewards. This ensures that front ends and stability providers are sort of rewarded for their essential service, right? Without front ends, nobody can access liquidity. Without stability providers, liquidating positions becomes, super undesirable. So making sure we reward those two key stakeholders in the ecosystem is essential for liquidity success. I won't go into this much further, but to get started, you can go to liquidity.org/frontend. There's some resources there to get things going for you. And if you want to make that part of your project throughout HackMoney, then by all means, please do. So the next interesting feature of Liquidity is the 0% interest rate. So in Liquidity, floating interest rates are replaced by a one-time borrowing fee. This means that you know the cost to borrow upfront. It's a lot closer to a fixed rate lending model. So to understand how Liquidity gets away with this when almost every single other borrowing protocol charges variable interest rates, I think we have to take a step back and understand, why do some of these protocols charge interest at all? Whether it's like MakerDAO or maybe Reflexer or some of these other ones, similar to Liquidity, where you're depositing ETH and then borrowing a minted asset from that ETH. So interest rates help encourage, or effectively help encourage and discourage borrowing. It's basically an economic lever that these protocols have access to. And so if there's too much borrowing, but not enough stablecoin demand, and the peg is starting to float below the LUSD peg, or any USD peg stablecoin is starting to float below $1, you can raise interest rates, and that'll encourage people to pay back their loans, decreasing the supply and increasing the price of the asset. There's too little borrowing, but too much stablecoin demand, and so the price of the synthetic asset is going up and floating way above peg. You can lower interest rates and encourage people to borrow more, so more supply enters the market and brings the peg back down to parity. So understanding that, you can start to understand how Liquidity can use fees to recreate a similar dynamic. So Liquidity uses what we call a base rate to determine the issuance fee. So the issuance fee, again, is charged on your LUSD whenever you borrow from Liquidity. It's just charged up front. And so if the demand for loans is too high relative to LUSD demand, that base rate will increase. Otherwise, it will decrease or decay over time, meaning that there's not too much demand for LUSD. And the way that Liquidity sort of detects this demand for LUSD is through what we call a redemption. And so at any time, anyone can redeem LUSD for the underlying ETH collateral at face value, such that 1 LUSD equals $1 worth of ETH. So when LUSD is below $1, meaning there's too many people borrowing, but not enough LUSD demand, arbitrageurs can sort of step in, buy up some LUSD, and redeem it for as if it's worth $1, sell that ETH that they get from that redemption, and then pocket the difference. So again, if LUSD is at 97 cents, they can buy up some LUSD, redeem it against the system as if it's worth $1, and then you can kind of keep the difference there. This in turn causes an increase in that base rate that I mentioned earlier, making loans and redemptions more expensive and thus less appealing. So when a lot of redemptions are taking place and LUSD is below its peg, then people will start redeeming it, and the cost to borrow will become, prohibitively expensive relative to other alternatives in the space. And so that means LUSD is being burned until eventually, hopefully, LUSD floats up back to parity with $1. And you can kind of visualize this by seeing here that, LUSD has this price floor of around $1 and a price ceiling of around $1.10 or so. And the reason $1.10 is because if it's at $1.15, you just take out a maximum loan at the 110% collateral ratio and then sell the LUSD, and you'll make an instant profit. It's basically free money. And very similar for if LUSD is trading comfortably below $1, you could just redeem it, and again, it's basically free money. So these two arbitrage strategies kind of keep LUSD where it needs to be as far as price parity goes. To understand how redemptions work, I put together this little visual because it's kind of weird. So it's important to understand because some people get pretty confused by this. So first things first, all troves in Liquity are sorted according to their collateralization ratio or their collateral ratio, mostly from least or most risky to least risky. So from lowest collateral ratio to highest collateral ratio. And somebody, when they come along to redeem LUSD, that LUSD is redeemed against the riskiest trove or set of troves, depending on the size of the redemption. And what happens is they redeem that LUSD and they pay off the debt of the riskiest troves that are affected by the redemption in return for those troves collateral. So you can see here, the guy comes along, he pays some LUSD, and in return, he's receiving some ETH. And then any surplus collateral is retained for the trove owner. So basically, if you're a trove owner and you're affected by a redemption, it's not a net loss for you because you get to keep your LUSD that you borrowed and you lose debt. So that's debt you don't have to pay back. And any bit of your extra ETH collateral that's left over after the redemption, you get to keep. So it's very different from a liquidation, for example, where in a liquidation, you lose 10% of the entire value of your trove. A redemption is sort of a net neutral experience for you. The only downside is that you lose a little bit of your ETH exposure. And the plus side is that LUSD doesn't lose half of its purchasing power by some weird event where there's too much LUSD supply and not enough demand. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but that's how sort of Liquity gets away with not having an interest rate by instead using a mechanism that allows LUSD to be burned and sort of go back into the system. The last big feature of Liquity is that it's governance free. So probably wondering like, wow, a lot of this seems automatic, and that's exactly right. So Liquity handles all of this stuff automatically. No new collateral types can be added. No new interest rates can be added. It's completely immutable, completely decentralized. And Liquity has no need for like governance or lengthy votes or lengthy processes or anything else. Basically, the issuance fee is determined algorithmically. The redemption fees are determined algorithmically, and everything else is handled by the smart contracts. And so again, no governance. The only thing that some people consider governance, I guess, are the underlying oracles. So Liquity uses two oracles. It uses the Chainlink ETHUSD price feed as its primary oracle, and then it has Telor, the Telor ETHUSD price feed as its secondary oracle. And it primarily uses the Chainlink price feed, but it can automatically switch to the Telor price feed if it needs to, and vice versa. So again, governance doesn't even need to intervene there. The system can automatically detect when something is off between or for one of the price feeds and switch between them. I guess I can pause now for some Q&A, and then if not, if there's no questions, I can go back and review our sort of prizes and what we're looking for now with Liquity in context. If there was something in the chat, I might have missed it. Doesn't look like there was. So if there's any questions now, feel free to ask them. If not, I'll go over, our prize stuff or anything else.
Hey, I missed the first few minutes, so I'll go back and watch the YouTube video later. But cool project. Question on the Oracle.
Yeah, sure.
Why is Chainlink expensive? Like, why are you using Chainlink there?
Yeah, so I mean, there weren't a ton of options that felt like sufficient to us, especially like maybe Uniswap would have been a potential viable option. The only problem was that basically LUSD just didn't exist whenever, before Liquity launched. So it was like a chicken and egg problem. And so we couldn't have gotten a ETH LUSD price feed or anything like that. And so that means we would have had to have relied on some other Uniswap pool or to get that TWAP price and use that, which didn't make sense to us. Like it didn't, like, how do we choose? Do we use USDC? Do we use USDT? Do we use DAI? It's hard to know. Or do we like average them all? And so it seemed to make the most sense to use Chainlink because it gave us that sort of guarantee that we were going to get a good ETHUSD price, and it's fast. It updates really frequently. I think every 0.5% price deviation is when it updates, and Liquity needs to be able to liquidate positions very fast due to the low collateral ratio. So those were some of the thought processes that kind of went into it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Is there any other ones? If not, I will go back over what we're looking for throughout this event, or kind of give some ideas of what we're looking for throughout this event now that there's context. So the TLDR people got it earlier, but anyway, to revisit, so some cool ideas that we're looking for are things like trope management tools, so people can avoid liquidations or avoid redemptions, or whatever cool sort of trope management ideas anybody might have. Migration tools are always great. Like people might want to be able to sort of migrate from Maker to Liquity, or even Liquity to Maker, Aave to Liquity, Liquity to Aave. Like having tools like that is super valuable. I guess one of the things that I should have mentioned regarding the sort of borrowing fee, if I can get back to it somewhere. Yeah, so the borrowing fee on Liquity is especially cheap relative to peers in the space. So for example, if you want to borrow on Maker right now, I think they just lowered the ETH vault to like 3.5% or something like that. Whereas on Liquity, the upfront borrowing fee is usually about 0.5%, and the upper bound is 5% in case that there's just a ton of redemptions or something. So for the most part, you're going to be able to borrow from Liquity by paying a 0.5% borrowing fee upfront. So for some people who are taking out Maker loans or Aave loans or whatever else, they might benefit from instead leaving those loans and borrowing from Liquity instead, where they know they'll get a much, much cheaper rate. So that's where those ideas come from about, being able to migrate between protocols. Then again, auto leveraging and deleveraging tools, the ability to access leverage really easily or automatically, it would be great for some people. Multitasking using, again, Instadapps DSA or just regular DS proxy architecture. There's a bunch of steps in some of these that people may not like paying gas for doing. Like, nobody wants to deposit to the stability pool, earn LQDY rewards, claim those LQDY rewards, then go stake them and pay gas all along the way. They'd probably rather just do it all in one transaction if it's possible. So creating tools like that would be sick. And then again, any product that increases LUSD demand by utilizing any of our integrations is fair game. And I'll just leave the prizes up for the last part of this in case there's any last minute questions. Other than that, I think I covered most of the important stuff.
Yeah,
you can go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just opening up to questions.
You can do it an auto leverage and a deleverage in the same transaction?
Maybe. I have no idea. It might depend on like what you're trying to do, and depends on the amount of leverage. But I'm not totally sure. But if you're planning on doing something like that, feel free to ask in the Discord, and I'll get somebody to take a look and make sure like whether it's possible or not possible.
Right, great. Any other questions?
Sweet.
Right.
If not, hopefully I made good time. I tried to make it short and sweet. I know people don't like sitting through like 50-minute workshops, so tried to run through it.
Yeah, it was great. And like Kolten said, you can continue if anything comes up, continue in the Discord, the Liquity channel in the Discord. And also we're going to post this to the ETHGlobal YouTube channel. So you can watch it if you want to get reminded of what was in it. All right. Thank you very much, Kolten. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you in Discord.
Awesome. Thanks.